Hey there, guys. Welcome back to another edition of the Cover One Buffalo podcast. I'm Aaron Quinn, and I'm reporting from where I always am, same place I always am. And I am here tonight with Greg Thompson, and he looks like he is in some warehouse parking lot somewhere doing a sketchy deal. I'm not really sure what's going on here, Greg. What's up, man?
Aaron, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm clearly in the driveway of my in-laws' house, close enough to steal their neighbor's wireless. So, shout outs to neighbor Lori for hooking me up with the Wi-Fi password.
That's right. I hope neighbor Lori sees this and sends you a bill for like $6.70.
I'll cut her my share.
Streaming, man, it takes a lot of bandwidth. So welcome, Bills fans. Obviously, this is a bit out of the norm. We always do the Wednesday show, but for 16 shows, we've been preparing you for the next opponent. Here we are with the wrap-up show. The season has come to an end. A lot of us, I think, we're looking forward to the end, even though there was no playoffs or nothing really big at the end of the season here. But we're getting ready for the 2019 offseason. We're going to have so much time to talk about that 2019 offseason that we won't bore you with our predictions and all the things we're talking about in the Slack channel about getting ready for that. We're going to talk about this past season and all the stuff and give out some awards and just kind of talk about this past season before we move on fully into the 2019 offseason. But before we do that, I just want to, anyone that's new here that's checking us out for the first time, I would just want to let you know, head over to cover1.net, check out what we're doing there. We've got all kinds of stuff going on over there. And now is the time. I've said it for the past couple of weeks. Now is really the time where all the talent at Cover One really starts to show. Greg and I are just part of it. You get to see us here every week, but the guys that are doing the scouting and breaking down all these college prospects, this is their time to shine. And the content is just rolling out all the time. And as fans of the Bills, or if you're a fan of another team and as you're getting ready for the draft and looking at what your team's going to do in the 2019 season, cover1.net is the premier place to go to get this information. While you're over there, check out the premium content because that's only growing as well. You can check out the different tiers that we offer for the premium content. I highly suggest it. We talked about the last podcast. Greg and I have both been lifelong football fans. And I think in the last 2 years since I've had access to this premium content, I've learned more about football in the last 2 years than I did the 30 something years leading up to becoming a premium content subscriber. Greg, you were a content subscriber before we brought you into the podcast. Can you tell us, kind of why you decided to do that and what you got out of it?
No, I think it's been awesome just connecting with like-minded fans and people are connected. And I'll say I have an unhealthy obsession with the Bills and with professional football and fantasy football and gambling and those things, but it all centers around professional football. I vaguely keep up with college football here or there. I'll watch the big games or the exciting games, but I literally now from the breakdowns from Russell and Christian and Jordan and everybody, like I learn about players that I literally didn't know existed. And I'll see an announcement of someone, declaring that they're eligible for the draft. And I'll immediately go in and be like, hey, is this guy good? And it's awesome to have a collection of resources with it. They're doing detailed film breakdowns and that we can really get informed opinions on these guys and what they have to offer. And then not to mention the awesome community in the Slack channel talking back and forth. And we already have half the guys in the chat here for the show tonight anyways. So just a lot of exciting stuff and looking forward to a great offseason.
Yeah, no, I am too, and I agree with you. As soon as I don't watch really any college football, my wife would kill me if I watched all day Saturday and all day Sunday. I wouldn't be married anymore, so I don't watch a ton of college football, but I start up right now every night kind of just taking a look at guys that fit Bill's needs and stuff like that, but I'm always hitting up Russ and all those guys in the Slack channel and saying, hey, I watched this, but tell me, I know you've watched way more. Can you just give me the Cliff Notes version on what I'm looking at so I don't waste my time? So it's a great resource. And I love the Slack channel. It's been on fire all day. And I don't see it slowing down at all, even though the season's over. I see it only ramping up and, people sending each other their mock drafts and opinions. So if you love the Bills like we love the Bills and love having these conversations and talking, it's totally worth going and joining the premium just for that. I pay more probably for draft guides than I think the premium costs for the year. So I've paid more in draft guides that aren't even that good and you don't really read that much. So totally worth it. It's the ultimate draft guide and more. So anyways, we'll talk about a little bit more about that before the end of the show here and the other things that we offer here through cover1.net. But I want to get into this season because I think going into the season, you and I were really on the same page. I think we saw a 4-6 win team, really focused on development of these young players. I had put out an article early in preseason that I was advocating for Josh Allen to start because I thought that it was important, not only to the idea of winning games, but his development. He was the guy that, we put all this faith in. I didn't have any worries about him regressing. We saw some good things. Allen being forced to start, not winning the job of being forced to start. I think that's the big takeaway for me from the year is development of Josh Allen, development of Tremaine Edmonds, these young guys, seeing that go throughout the year. Even though there's some ugly games and some frustrating games, they probably could have won. They probably could have had a better record. I don't care about any of that. Ultimately, it's about the development of the young talent. Where were you overall from, this summer to now and kind of the roller coaster of the season?
Yeah, a lot of pleasant surprises, things that I'm glad I was wrong about. I was obviously not on the bandwagon for Josh Allen, and that's been a pleasant surprise when we did draft Josh Allen. I was very much hopeful that A.J. McCarron was going to lead us to a solid, respectable season, and that maybe when things got out of hand, we would, be mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, and then Allen would play 2 to 4 games at the end of the year and give us a little glimpse. And all of those things ended up not being correct. We ended up having kind of a mess early on, but then pushing Allen into play immediately. And now I'm really glad that he got those reps. And I think it really reconfirmed my faith in McDermott and in the overall front office and staff and direction that we're able to go in and kind of take a look at, the fact that they were able to, again, squeeze 6 wins out of a very flawed roster. And that overall, it doesn't sound amazing, but 15-17 for McDermott in his first 2 seasons with, again, an incredibly flawed roster with the direction and the optimism we have going forward, I think is really exciting. And, obviously Cromar has incredible style, taste, and I appreciate him, shouting me out for the nice sweater.
It is a really nice sweater. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And when you look at, obviously part of when we look back on the season was this draft. And I know people want to talk about the first draft that McDermott was a part of, but I like to stress to people that draft was still, I know McDermott came in and there was a lot of reports that McDermott was in control of that draft. And I do believe that ultimately he had the final say in a lot of what the team was going to do in that draft. But Doug Whaley was still here, and it was Doug Whaley's scouting department that was giving Sean McDermott those scouting reports and the work that they had done all year long before Sean McDermott was even a thought in Terry Bagula's eye, a twinkle in his eye, if you will. All that work was being done during the season. I think sometimes we always forget that when we're talking about the draft. We live in that moment, and the scouts work all year. So that first draft, I don't know that we can put it all entirely on this regime because it was a weird moment in time where you kept a previous GM and scouts, brought in a new coach, and totally trying to revamp your team and organization. Obviously, they hit on some things, and McDermott saw some guys that he liked, but that was a kind of a murky draft. This past offseason was 100% a Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott lockstep offseason from free agency and draft. And I think Bills fans should really be excited for this moving forward of what we saw develop throughout the season of this draft. Obviously, the excitement with the top heavy part of the draft with Allen and Edmonds is always going to get you excited. I'm not going to say Josh Allen has made it yet, but I think we can all agree that his floor is a lot higher than most analysts projected. I had him. I'm not an analyst, but I didn't have him as a first round pick. I was very hard on him in the offseason. Throughout the draft process. I think he's clearly shown that he's probably a first round pick, maybe not picked where he was, but that happens with quarterbacks all the time. Edmonds, I think, has shown the glimpses that he totally justifiable being picked where he is, and as young as he is, I think there's a ton of excitement to be there. Harrison Phillips, there's a lot of excitement in what he can develop into. Obviously, Taron Johnson came out of nowhere. I was super hard on that pick. He comes out of nowhere and has a phenomenal season. And then, obviously, there's still some guys that didn't either make the roster. Ray McLeod probably doesn't have a future here with this team, but then they made up for those misses with Foster and Levi Wallace, who I think have a substantial role on this team moving forward. So you see this ability to bring in and identify young talent, and that has to make people excited. going into the 2019 offseason. I think that's the most important part of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to be able to think about that. Like you said, that first offseason, the first draft, McDermott might have been making the final say, the final tie-breaking decision, but he didn't build a draft board. He didn't go in and create a tier system and decide who were the available players to be chosen from. So obviously, yeah, he might have been in there and said, yeah, no, I actually like this guy a little bit better. But it was out of the 2 or 3 players that Doug Whaley and his team queued up for that slot in the draft. Then this year, I think that the real key is it's not that all of a sudden Beane and McDermott are better at drafting than other front offices, or, oh, great, now we have this sizable advantage over other franchises. What I think it has shown is they're very good at picking players that are a fit for their setup and their scheme and the kind of players they want. And now all of a sudden we're able to pick players that maybe have a higher probability of working out for us versus just rolling the dice that you're going to make the talent fit or figure out a way to use it. Instead, they're being a little bit more educated and intelligent about the kind of player they want. And now all of a sudden that has a better chance to work out. Not that we're just smarter at picking players. They're maybe just better at being selective and picking the right kind of players.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that we saw that this year in free agency too. Obviously, super handcuffed by previous regimes, and also their own decisions to move away from guys that didn't fit the DNA that they discuss. Obviously, your Darius and some other guys, Sammy Watkins, moving away from those guys hurt this year's ability to gain free agents. But where I get excited is, and he's not a world beater, but you talked about it a little bit on the last podcast, a guy like Raphael Bush just comes in and does his job, and he has some flash plays. He doesn't have a lot of plays that we're talking about where we're like, dang it, why is Raphael Bush out on the field right now? He didn't have a lot of that. You saw some flashes at times. He just was a guy that fit, not a guy that teams were really going after heavy in free agency. I do think that is going to be the mold that they continue on and getting more of those kind of guys. But I think you're hit the nail on the head when you're discussing the right fit, the right DNA. I mean, it's talked about all the time, and people kind of chalk it up to coach speak when McDermott says, oh, we want, standard DNA, the right kind of guy, high motor. But you see it. It actually comes to fruition. You see it, and it has a positive impact on the field. And I think the only frustration fans have, and I understand the frustration, is it's been heavily weighted towards the defensive side of the ball, and we have not been able to get a lot of that on the offensive side of the ball. And maybe you can kind of talk about where that was at this year. Obviously, they brought in on defense, Start Lutule, Trent Murphy. They spent a lot of money to kind of shore up that. We had Richie Incognito and Eric Wood leave. We have the firing of Castillo today. We didn't even get to talk about yet, but the offensive line struggled. They never really replaced those pieces. Do you think that this regime can identify offensive talent? And is this going to be the year they do it?
I think I'll at least say, trying to be objective, I think it's fair to question that. Now, I think it's cynical or unrealistic to assume that they can't, but I think it's reasonable to say that, hey, I still am apprehensive or anxious. I wonder if they'll have the same level of skill and ability to identify those diamonds in the rough on the offensive side, or make the right high-end investments if we go out and spend on big-time offensive line talent or a receiver or a big money tight end or whatever they go after. I at least can see that it's reasonable to question that. Now, I think that sound, good decision-making and good football IQ is going to translate. I think that we've shown that, they talked about being judicious and being careful and being, disciplined in how we spend and where we decide to go with things. I think that but I don't think it's fair to assume that we can't do it.
Yeah, and I think where people get frustrated, obviously, which adds fuel to the fire, is it's a big part of what happened this season here is Kelvin Benjamin. You swing on a big trade for Kelvin Benjamin, totally backfires. You end up having to release him. You don't win out. I think that's kind of where fans fuel, does this front office, this regime have what it takes on the offensive side of the ball to identify the talent they need? I think a lot of people are assuming that they're just going for the loyalty of things they know, and they'll go that way. I don't know what it's going to be like. And I agree with you that it is healthy to have a little bit of skepticism as to whether or not they can, but I do think it's a little obnoxious to say downright they can't identify any offensive talent at all, and we're totally screwed and we'll never have a good offense, and they don't even want a good offense. They just want to win games 6-3. I don't think any of that is legitimate at all, and I think you should laugh at anyone that discusses things like that. I think they've shown the ability to identify some offensive talent. Obviously, I think Josh Allen has more talent than a lot of people think he did. I think you look at
an important piece of that is they're not so handcuffed and married to their initial thought that they won't adjust and adapt. So it would have been worse if they tried to prove themselves right and doubled down and re-signed Kelvin Benjamin, because you want to know what? We're going to show you guys that this was the right, the right decision. No, they were self-aware and humble enough to say, you want to know what? That was a mistake. We tried to take a swing at it, and I think McDermott used that exact terminology that, hey, if you want to go for some big hits, you're going to swing and miss every once in a while, and that's a shame. But at least they had the discipline to cut their losses and move on and didn't try to double down. That kind of thing happens all the time where, coaches try to prove themselves right, or front offices try to prove themselves right and end up digging deeper and making it worse.
Oh, 100%. And I've got to go on record. I've said it here on the podcast before, but if people ever look up the history of this podcast, I did have one this summer where I stood on my soapbox and said, we got to re-sign Kelvin Benjamin now before the season starts and get that distraction out of the way. He looked good this summer. I want him. Let's get him on a 3-year deal. Man, I'm so happy that I have no say in anything that the Bills do, because they would be totally run into the ground if they listen to me. So I'm glad they don't, and that they have a nice, steady, good leadership there. But I think that they can identify some good young talent. Obviously, we saw flashes from McKenzie this year, flashes from Foster, an undrafted free agent, comes to the Bills. That relationship with Dable, a guy that even got cut this year and came back, but showed flashes. They've been able to bring in some of that. I think Jason Kroom showed some flashes this year in some small development. I'm not saying he's going to be a tight end one for this team ever at any point, but I think that's fine as a third option at tight end that can give you a big play here and there. I think, Marcus Murphy had some flashes in the preseason. Obviously, Shady's got to get going. I think that they do have the ability to identify the talent. I think we've seen glimpses of it. I just don't think the assets have been there. I know with Castillo being fired, there's a lot of why didn't they fix the line? It's kind of, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If they fixed the offensive line, then you don't pick up, I know he's often criticized, but you don't pick up Star Latulippe, and you don't pick up Trent Murphy, and you don't pick up that depth that led to the number 1, 2, 3, whatever ranking you want to go, defense in the league. And so it's a tough thing to manage a roster, especially with the amount of dead cap they had. You don't have that this year. So I feel a little bit better that they'll be able to manage to bring in some guys, but I think you hit it, and maybe you can explain to people that are listening to the first time of, what getting rid of that dead cap means for the depth of this roster.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First, I know you had touched on it earlier, and we wanted to make sure that we updated. As of this recording, the reporting is that the Bills have fired both Juan Castillo and Terry Rubisky. I know multiple people have what we believe to be speculated.
Danny Crossman's still on this team?
That Danny Crossman has not been fired yet, although I really, and I know a handful of guys in the chat, he was talking about this in the chat, that I don't think it's any more complicated than the fact that they started with offense in doing their coaching evaluations and meetings. I have a feeling they'll do defense next, and then they'll do special teams, and that the news is leaking from those people. That I think news got out from Juan Castillo, news got out from Terry Rubisky, not from within the trusted Sorrow, and people like that went out and confirmed it. And that's where that news came from. So I know a lot of sources out there are speculating that Danny Crossman is going to be fired, but I just don't believe it's happened yet. But I also don't believe there's any reason to think it won't. Now, in the premium Slack, we get into a good discussion about a guy like Juan Castillo. I think that two important things can both be true. One, I don't think he was set up with a great deal of talent when you talk about losing Richie Incognito, losing Eric Wood, trading away Cordy Glenn, that he did not have a great deal of talent. Separately, I also don't think he developed or was a net positive to any of the existing players. I think guys like John Miller, Jordan Mills, Ryan Groy, with 2 years each under Juan Castillo, got materially worse over those 2 years, and that his job should be to maintain their level of play or help them develop or improve. And I chalk up a fair amount of Deion Dawkins' struggles to not having Richie Incognito and Eric Wood, but he didn't improve either. So I do think it's fair to lay that at the feet of Juan Castillo, and that I think that if we're going to make a huge investment in the offensive line, get ready to move forward, we're going to have an opportunity to improve that, and I'd rather have a new voice in that room. The same way, let's go with the assumption that all the Twitter sources are true and that Danny Crossman does lose his job. I think he's the same way. I think that we had $50 million in dead cap. I think that we did not have a deep roster and probably had one of the thinnest rosters in the entire NFL from a depth of talent standpoint, and that depth of talent is where the special teams comes from. Your special teams is that 35th to 53rd guy, the guys who aren't rotating in as much, and that Danny Crossman probably didn't have a full deck to play with. However, we consistently had, lack of discipline penalties, lining up penalties, all kinds of consistently letting up bigger returns and never having bigger returns, and just a laundry list of issues that continued for years here. And that, yes, there were times where we had some exceptional individual efforts from a kicking standpoint, and that when the roster was deeper, it was a little bit better. But I just think that both of those guys, at a minimum, giving them every benefit of the doubt, were below average and not making a positive impact. And that if we're going to invest in a depth of roster to help special teams and big investments in the offensive line, I'd like a new voice leading those. And at worst, I think they were bad coaches and deserve to be fired. So somewhere in that range, nothing was good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what gives me some good feeling and optimism is, you always say it, is building up that middle ground with guys like your Raphael Bushes. I think that's super exciting moving forward, and I think that that's what they were missing all year. But they still played, outside of maybe a handful of games this year. Obviously, I'm thinking right off the top of my head, that Chargers game was a huge blowout. There was a couple just bad games this year, but for the most part, the Packers game, for the most part, though, this team was a competitive team week in and week out with one of the worst rosters, predicted to only win like 2 games by a lot of people out there prognosticating.
Multiple had them as the worst team. Mike Clay specifically had them as the worst team in the league, the least talented in the league.
Yeah, worst roster by his spreadsheets statistically in the league, but they came out every week, and they might have been. I'm not going to doubt that they had the worst roster in the league. They might have, top to bottom, the worst roster going into the season, not knowing what Josh Allen was going to be, not knowing what all these young guys would be able to do. I can totally see that. That's fair if you want to make that point. But what doesn't get accounted for by these analytics guys, and this is a problem that I have on Twitter all the time, is there's certain types of things that can't be quantified, and that's how hard people play, momentum, things like that people don't believe exist just because they can't be quantified. And the Bills thrive off of those non-quantifiable things. And I think that is what makes McDermott appealing to me, is he seems to be able to pull the non-quantifiable parts of sports out of this team and get more out of guys than he probably should. And you saw that in a lot of games that they hung around in that they didn't have any business being in, with a historically bad offense and terrible offensive line, and at times not good cornerbacks coming in to play spot duty. And they still hung around in some of these games. Do you get that sense that the non-quantifiable is here with the Bills?
Yeah, I think it's very fair to say. And I think, again, it leads back to them finding the right kind of guys, the right kind of fit.
Oh, I think I lost you there.
Allows,
Uh,
you got
Yep.
me? All right, sorry. Yeah, I think that it really is the key to, finding the right kind of guys, the guys that fit to their program and are buying in. And that I think it's easy to assume that every single locker room is fully bought in, all on the same page. Everyone is pulling for in the right direction, willing to sacrifice maybe personal stats or their individual performance, and always interested in the team. And I hate to tell you this, that's simply not the case. There are a lot of guys who are forced to be in a position that it's only going to be in their best interest to put good film up, get their stats, get their numbers, and be able to go in and protect themselves and look out for, people joke all the time about guys making business decisions and that, yeah, I'm not going to reach out for that pass there because I was going to get lit up and I got to worry about my next contract. And I think that they have the right kind of guys who are laying it on the line, playing hard, defending their guys, wanting to win. I don't think that every team would want to lay it out and be able to, want to win for Kyle Williams. There's a lot of guys that this is their first year on the team, and that they didn't have a vested interest in wanting to send out some guy they didn't really know on a high note. But I think every single guy was bought into that, and that's the kind of locker room that I think they're trying to build. And it's something that they want to be able to have that kind of environment, and to then go into trying to have the sum is greater than the whole of the parts, and
Yeah.
trying to be able to build that kind of environment.
Absolutely. And I think it gets scoffed at online of, people saying the DNA and again, back to all this coach speak. I think a lot of people scoff at those things. And I do think you see it. You look at where the Texans are right now, and that game, I was going to ask you, and I'll kind of lead off with it, kind of the game that got away this year from you. And I think the Texans, when I look at that game, that's a team that is in a position where the Bills want to be right now in the playoffs with a young quarterback. And I think that was a totally winnable game. And I don't think that the talent matched in that game. I don't think when you look at the two rosters that the Bills belong competing with in a game like that, but they did. Obviously, the Texans end up winning the game. The Bills can only score 13 points, but you go back and watch that game, and I think that competitively they were in that game, and that doesn't come from the roster. That comes from ability to pull all that extra stuff out. So kind of that, I want to run that by you. You look through or kind of reminisce over this past season. What were maybe your biggest disappointment of a game, and maybe a game that got away, and just kind of the overall feel of the season for you?
Yeah, I think there's two of them that really stick out to me. You touched on the one. Obviously, there's a lot of what if to where Josh Allen's season was going, as he made to that point probably the best throw of his season on the play that he got hurt in the Houston Texans game. He goes out, Peterman finishes that drive, and then all of a sudden obviously throws the game-cinching pick six to go back the other way. That one's a tough one to stomach at that point. And just think about the fact, I think that would have made the Texans, really sink their season from where they ended up turning it around. And then the other one is, wanting to know what if we had Josh at home for that Monday nighter against the Patriots, where we took it, 6-9 late into the third quarter, and that, maybe there could have been something a little bit different there and something exciting to understand what, where we're going to be able to put that. Those are two I would have seen different, but there's all kinds of things back and forth. We had a couple fortunate bounces. What if Prater makes that field goal against Detroit? That could have been tough. There's things that I think could have gone a little bit differently in some of those other games. But, if we don't get those early turnovers against Minnesota, do we end up rolling like that? There's some things that I think we had the ball bounce our way, but they had the kind of team that could pounce on that, take advantage of it. And I think that's optimistic to look at that. Hey, we're not relying on just lining up, being better man-to-man, better talent. We can take advantage of situations. And I think that speaks well to their opportunity going forward.
Absolutely. I think the one that killed me the most this year is the Bears game. That whole thing, I had the tickets. My brother's a lifelong Bears fan. I'm a lifelong Bills fan. So we had tickets early in the season. At least there was going into the season, seeing what the Bears did, I was like, oh, this game's going to be horrible. I had a little bit of hope that Josh Allen, was going to be there and I could at least watch that. Nope, that doesn't happen at all. And just a 41-9 trouncing of my team at home, and just watching Bears fans come up around me as Bills fans left. It was just horrible. Obviously, seeing Nathan Peterman, a 3 interception performance. And that just really reminded me of really the one beef that I've had with Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane was the handling of that backup quarterback position. Just really just came to fruition while I'm sitting there kind of half drunk in the middle of New Era Field. Just very frustrating day for me.
Your brother in your ear.
Oh my God, the whole ride home was horrible. So that one really stands out to me as probably the worst memory of the season here. There's a lot of blowouts. What about you? Where were you at? Just sitting at home, just with your head in your hand, shaking like this is just so bad. Because there was some of those moments this year.
Yeah, I would say my lowest point was the Colts game, only because games like the Packers and the Bears, I didn't have high expectations per se. They were both teams that had played well and were, in a direction of where they felt like, okay, this is, something that, hopefully we can hang in there and do well, but it just kind of got away from us. I thought we were going to beat the Colts. The Colts were really struggling at that point. They hadn't turned things around yet. And at minimum, I thought it was going to be a competitive game where they were going to have a chance and, we'd kind of see how things shook out. As that game started to get away from them, that was really hard. And the turnovers just, it just was at that low point of the season. And again, not having Josh and not having those things together, it was really hard to be able to find any positive element to it. But, that's builds the character of a team. That's really what they needed to do to get through this season and get the reps for the kind of young guys that we had. And, those low moments still, I know that McDermott and Bean both like to talk about it. There were still wins and victories within those games to learn from, to be able to get opportunities to get those younger guys back in there and to see them play or to expose the players that needed to be removed and pulled out that was still necessary and something we needed to go through.
Absolutely. The tape is priceless for them to go through here and really evaluate the team. It always hurts a little bit. You mentioned the Colts game, and I mentioned the Texans game earlier. For what the Bills were kind of a stepping stone for both those teams to have the season that they had the rest of the year. It goes to show you in this league, man. I mentioned it about momentum. You get that one big win, and it can really snowball in a positive way for you. And unfortunately, the Bills were a stepping stone on the way for two teams to snowball into some success for them this year. Hopefully they can turn that around and be that to somebody else next year. Khalid mentions a very good point too. Another game that I was at was the Jets game, and he says, Allen versus Darnold might be the Kelly Marino situation. The next one of those two good friends that do a lot of battles together. I'm not going to say that those two players are ever going to get to the Hall of Fame, amazing, fantastic top 10 quarterback careers that those two Hall of Famers have, but they could be two really good competitive guys in the same division that are friends, came in the league at the same time in a highly talked about draft class. I think that might be one of the underrated kind of stories. We didn't get it in the first game. We kind of got robbed of them being able to go against each other head to head, but we did get in the second one, and I was there, and that was a phenomenal game. Even though it didn't go the Bills' way, there was a lot of sloppy play. It was a fun game to watch. Darnold kind of drives down the field. So no matter how kind of that shakes out, I think that's something kind of fun and an underlying storyline of this year and moving forward when we look back.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of positives to be able to take from it. And I know we get into this a lot in the premium channel Slack. I think a lot of Bills fans feel a need to swipe at and try to put down the other rookie quarterbacks in order to build up Josh Allen. And I always try to remind people it's mutually exclusive. It just doesn't have anything to do with the other. Now, when we play them, of course I want to win, but how good Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson, Josh Rosen turn out to be just doesn't impact Josh Allen. It just doesn't. I know people get all worked up about that Patrick Mahomes could have been at the pick that we were at, but it just doesn't impact us. It just doesn't have anything to do with how good Josh Allen is or is going to be.
You can find Greg at Greg Thompson. I want to. If anyone hears that Patrick Mahomes, I just want to sit and watch the fire happen on his Twitter, because I've mentioned those things and my Twitter lights up. So I just want to interject that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Come and find me. I'm happy to do it. But honestly, and Liam just brought it up here. I actually think there's a non-zero chance that all 5 rookie.
Oh, broke up a little bit there.
No, I think there's a decent chance that all 5 rookie quarterbacks end up being pretty good, and that it doesn't have to be that. I know everybody jokes about, drafting rookie quarterbacks is 50-50 and half are going to boom and half are going to bust. Yeah, in the aggregate, that's true, but it's possible that all 5 guys work out here and end up being pretty decent.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I see a lot of the Rosen obviously is one because a lot of fans wanted him. He's also on a bad team, is having a really bad season. I do think a lot of where fans are coming from is, and I deal with it, the Jeff Schwartz of the world, the Mike Trainers of the world that at every moment possible try to instigate the passionate fan base that Buffalo has. Obviously, we have a huge following online and are very quick to run up in your mentions and tell you exactly how we feel about our team. Bills fans are known for that, so it does create some controversy. But I think those guys constantly harping on how bad Josh Allen is, or kind of taking shots at Josh Allen when they don't do it with Rosen, or they don't, highlight those fumble plays, those bonehead plays by Sam Darnold, and just kind of talk about the positives of those guys. I think that kind of spurs the conversation you're talking about a little bit, but I do think that it's tricky for Bills fans to get into that. I don't think Josh Rosen having a bad year this year means that Josh Allen is somehow better than him. It can't play out that way. We won't know how this all plays out. And I think that it's okay if everybody's good. Or if the other guys are good and Josh Allen isn't, that's still going to end up being okay. We have no control over it. The Bills selected the guy that fits best for them, and I believe that. So let's move on to presenting some of our awards for this year. So every week we do the Gruntled Discount. You're getting a lot of comments, by the way, on this cardigan. I think your cardigan might win the MVP of the year here.
I'm open to it.
Yeah. Now I got a serious question for you. Did you purchase this cardigan, or did your wife purchase this for you?
No, I buy all my own clothes. I like to visit all the most dapper haberdasheries.
Oh, awesome. You and Nate should go shopping sometime. I'm sure Nate would love that. So let's start with and kind of make our way up to the MVP award here. So let's start with Defensive Rookie of the Year. We talked about the young players, the young core of this team moving forward. We like it. We have a good feeling of where we're at with that. For you, who is your Defensive Rookie of the Year?
It's really fun that this isn't an easy answer, because I think you can make solid arguments for the start that Taron Johnson was off to. I think you can make a great case for the end of the season that Levi Wallace put together. I'm going to go with Tremaine Edmonds just because we got such a sustained season from him. He developed so well, ended up with 115 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 sacks, multiple passes defensed. I think he put together a good overall season, although I think the peak of Taron Johnson was probably a little bit stronger, and the way that Levi Wallace was finished was really encouraging. I'd give it to Tremaine Edmonds.
Okay. We've only talked about this today, doing this for the show, and I kind of just, in the back of my mind, this was a really hard one for me to battle with all day. And I like you said, that's exciting, because I think going into the season, if you would ask me who's going to be the Defensive Rookie of the Year for this team, no question about it, Tremaine Edmonds was going to be the best rookie on this defense, maybe on the whole team, and I wouldn't even think twice about it. But I ended up picking Taron Johnson, mostly because of where he was picked and what was expected out of him based on where he was picked. I think most people didn't really even expect him to come in and produce anything this year, maybe some spot duty when guys were injured. He really took over that job and I was very adamant about re-signing my love of my life and crush, Leonard Johnson, back to this team, because I thought that slot cornerback position is so important in the NFL nowadays, and it gets underrated all the time. Yeah, and it gets underrated all the time because people think, you can just throw whoever your third worst cornerback is, just throw him out there and play slot. But it's not that. And I was nervous about a rookie, a guy from not a big school. He just instantly took over that job. You started hearing about him all throughout training camp, just really took it and ran with it. And when he came in, he just really was pretty flawless play, great communication for a rookie. I saw everything I needed to see to really fall in love with this player. I hope his shoulder gets fixed because I hate it every time that he comes in and fires his gun and he goes up limping. I hate seeing that, but there's a lot to be excited about this guy moving forward, because at that position, you can make a good living being a career slot cornerback, and you get Milano back and you get him back and you have that continuity and that communication between those positions and handing off things in this defense. And I don't know, man. I got a lot of excitement about Taron Johnson. He, for me, hands down wins my Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, and I know the comparison that I used early on when we spoke was Antoine Winfield, and I think that is so exciting for Bills fans to have that kind of spark plug at the nickel corner spot for the next 5 years, 10 years. I think that's just something really exciting. I think very deserving of the award.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that position, which is fantastic. Now we just have to figure out if Levi Wallace is the cornerback 2 or not. And I think that is also, like you said, very deserving for him, an undrafted free agent, to come in and be a guy that, hey, maybe we consider giving him a chance to compete for that job going into next year. Like, huge win for the Bills organization. So very exciting to be able to have a couple options there. And obviously Tremaine Edmonds is a great pick by you. Tons to be excited about this young core.
I'm going to kind of call myself out as a hypocrite here. You and I both are the first to bash the PFF grades, except I always retweet it when they always have good grades for the Bills. So it was exciting to see, regardless of how you feel about the PFF grades and how flawed they can be. It was interesting to see that they actually graded Levi Wallace as the top graded rookie corner in the entire league this year by a healthy margin. He ended up finishing at like 84.5, and I think the next best was Denzel Ward in the high 70s. So regardless of, we joke all the time, I'll be a hypocrite that I don't like the grades except when they grade Bills really well. But it was at least in one metric or one world of subjective grading, they really liked the season he had.
Yeah, and I totally rip them apart all the time. And it's not their stats are not, the grade stats are not totally irrelevant. Those guys don't. It's not like they're just two knuckleheads sitting around that don't know anything about football. So there is some relevance to those grades. And I do agree with you when I don't retweet it because of how much trash I talk. I tend to not because I know that's coming back on me, but the thought goes through my mind to send that retweet, but I don't want my mentions.
Real quick, Eyeball Billy and TJ are talking in the chat of a question I brought up a little while ago. Just for anybody who's wondering, with Tremaine Edmonds, his natural position in college was outside linebacker, on the weak side. But I want to say the reason that they moved him to middle linebacker was because of the potential you guys see in that zone coverage, what a problem he is in the middle, and what that range and his wingspan and crazy frame allows him to do, is that they saw all pro potential if he was able to grasp that. So I don't think it's crazy for people to bring up, hey, would it make sense to go after a more prototypical middle linebacker and move him to the outside? But I actually think they purposely did that because he has an unbelievably high ceiling. If you can get a 6'5", 250-pound guy running a 4.5 at middle linebacker, that is a game-changing frame. And that's, again, I don't want to be blasphemous, that's what Brian Urlacher did. That's what allowed Brian Urlacher to be the game-changing player he was, is you just don't have a guy at that size and speed and frame able to do that. And, I hope they still go after the best player available. And if they bring in a guy that allows them the luxury of looking at that, that's fine. But I think there's an incredibly high ceiling. Even after this coming draft, there's a decent chance that Tremaine Edmonds will still be the youngest player in the NFL after this draft, a whole year after. So he has just an unbelievably high ceiling.
Yeah, I don't think there's I can't really think of a scenario where the Bills move him outside of middle linebacker. I think that they liked the progress that they saw from him. I think this year they're fully invested into making him that, and if the future leader of this defense. And you mentioned Brian Urlacher, Bob Babich. The Bills are so lucky to have Babich as their middle linebacker, as their linebackers coach for this team. He has coached multiple Pro Bowl players, Hall of Famers. The guy is a genius defensive coach. And you go look at his resume, go Google Bob Babich. He is the perfect guy that you want to handle the franchise defensive player in his development. And I think that you hit it right on the head of what they want. And people talk about prototypical linebackers. I think that Tremaine Edmunds is the next generation prototypical new NFL linebacker, a guy that is just a freak athlete with that type of speed and explosion. And so I don't see him moving anywhere. And if they were to bring in somebody that was actually better and move him over, sure, fine. Let's do that too.
Awful hard to do.
Yeah,
but yeah, we need an.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So
guys in the next phase.
Oh, you broke up a little bit there. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Let's go to the next award.
Let's go over to offense. So offensive rookie of the year, maybe a couple options here. I'm going to kick it over to you. I think we might have the same thing here.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's exciting to maybe talk about someone like Robert Foster, and I think he had an exciting end of the season and a very bright future and a chance to be there, but it's silly to pretend that it's not Josh Allen. You know, it's so exciting for the first time in 20 years to have legitimate optimism at the quarterback position, and, you know, to have someone who exceeded certainly yours and I expectations to a great degree. And I think every Bills fan, even the most optimistic homer of a Bills fan, Josh Allen had a better season than what we possibly could have anticipated. So he ran away with this award in an exciting fashion and brought fun and excitement back to Bills fans across the world. So it's an easy slam dunk for me that Josh Allen is our offensive rookie of the year.
Yeah, and not only because of what he did on the field, a big thing for me, obviously you touched on it. He made me look silly, and I'm fully on board the train and ready for this ride and to see how it goes. But where he really won me over is the competitive nature. He has elite competitive toughness to him. And you saw it in college, but you just didn't know how that translates to the NFL. You don't know if a young guy that's fired up and has that kind of attitude is going to win over an NFL locker room. And I think you saw it. Him and Shady are like this odd couple of best friends, and Shady is there sticking up for Josh all the time. And you see the way that the veterans on this team talk about him and him getting the defense hyped up. And I think that is huge. All the stuff that doesn't happen in the scoreboard or in the box score that Josh Allen did this year, to even if somebody had some really good stats like a Robert Foster, I think that for me put Josh Allen, he has taken the leadership role of this team as a rookie and really owned it. And I can't wait to see how that develops as well as his on-field progress. So I'm super happy to say that we agree there. And Josh Allen's definitely my offensive rookie of the year. To one that I think that goes underlooked here, who would be your most improved player? So guys already here and maybe been here for a little while, who really took a step forward in your mind this year. Who are you going with there?
For me, it's easily Matt Milano. I think that Milano showed a exciting potential late in the season, last year, and that, really didn't get a chance to start until week 10, week 12, had some strong play down the stretch. And, I think that then stepped into this year. I was kind of hopeful that we'd see a little bit more and be able to kind of step up a little bit further. And he just ran with that and was really a game-changing outside linebacker in the modern sense now. He's not big, 6 foot, 225, maybe he's 230 now. And just was able to go sideline to sideline, making big plays all the time, able to go through and, really was what I was excited to see in, putting together a fantastic season and really just was a fun, surprising, breakthrough player, maybe more than most improved because he was already pretty solid. But certainly I think was on his way to a Pro Bowl season before the terrible injury, and all of us just, need to pray that he's going to be able to make a full recovery. It did sound like it from the injury experts that we talked to that had an opportunity. It seemed to be fairly clean, didn't have a lot of ligament damage or terrible surgery that went with it. So I think there's a chance he makes a full, healthy recovery. And that's exciting for Bills going forward, that we have potentially, nowadays you only run your 3 linebackers 40, 50% of the time. The 60, 70% that you only have 2 linebackers on the field, having the speed and coverage and impact of Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmunds is really exciting going forward.
Yeah, no, totally. And I really didn't even think of that. And that's a great point, and I think he's totally deserving of it. And I do agree that he was on pace for a Pro Bowl season before the injury. So hopefully a speedy recovery over there to Matt Milano. This was another one, man, I debated really all day back and forth, and I was really hung up between Shaq Lawson and Zay Jones.
Yeah.
Just because of how bad Zay's rookie year was. He wasn't a world beater this year, but he had a couple really nice games, showed some confidence, really overcame a lot from the offseason. But ultimately, I settled on Shaq Lawson. Is my most improved player this year, just because of how hard I was on him this summer and what I really needed to see from him to earn that 5th-year option on this team. I think he has. I think that he's definitely somebody that they want to be a part of this team and buys into the process. And I said it last week, he'll never live up to the draft pick that he was, and it's not his fault that he was picked where he was and everything that goes along with that. But I think that he's a really nice rotational player on this defensive line that's really important to Sean McDermott, and he does his job. And his job is sometimes like Star Latuli's, where it isn't always going to show up on the stat sheet. Sometimes it's keeping contain on a run play, and he does that. And that doesn't always show up as some sexy play as a big tackle for loss or a sack or anything like that. But Shaq is coming in and done his job, and I'm very happy with him, and he no longer is a guy that frustrates me. So he wins most improved.
No, I think it's a great point. I touched on it, last week when we talked about that. If you had asked me coming into the season, is there any possibility the Bills pick up his 5th-year option, I would have laughed at you and said, there's absolutely no way. That's a crazy amount of money. And now I actually think it's worth considering. I kind of hope we can get him back on a 2 or 3 year deal that's more team friendly. But the fact that I actually kind of think that $9 or $10 million 5th-year option is worth considering now. And that's crazy that he made that big of a leap forward. And I think it's a great award.
Thank you. I thought about it a lot. Least improved. This one's a hard one because I'm not a talent evaluator. And if I was, I really have a hard time being too hard on a guy. I really don't like when guys are taken out on Twitter and saying this guy sucks or this guy's that or whatever. These guys are all pros. They put a lot of work into it. So least improved is a really hard one for me to even talk about. And it was hard to discuss in my own head as I was coming up with it, but we got to do it. So where are you on least improved player for the Bills this past season?
I agree. I really struggled with this one just because I didn't want to be negative about it. And I think that there's a case to be made for Dion Dawkins from a pure performance standpoint. I am going to give him a pass in that I think that it was really him trying to take on the mantle of being the top lineman and trying to make up for Richie Incognito and Eric Wood not being there. So I'm going to go with the right side of the offensive line in both John Miller and Jordan Mills. I think that we had an opportunity to solidify things there and to really at least stem the tide. And both of them took material steps back and really, put Josh Allen at risk, ended up losing playing time several instances. And I think really just struggled overall. So I think honestly, you can make a case anywhere across the offensive line. And I think it's fair. I know TJ mentioned Dion Dawkins. I think it's a fair, case to be made there. I will give Dion the break and go on the right side with John Miller and Jordan Mills. But the offensive line as a whole was the least improved and the biggest weakness on the roster in my mind.
Absolutely. No question about it. And I had kind of the same internal debate that you had. I did end up picking Dion Dawkins, and my reasoning really was because of how good his first season was and my expectation of him going into this year. And I feel like he's still going to be a very good NFL player. I kind of am hoping, I'm leaning towards kind of what you're hoping for in the draft, which is get a, star left tackle, a Jonah Williams type guy, and move Dion over to the right side. I do think he can thrive in that position or even moved into guard. I think he's a good offensive lineman in the NFL. I just don't know if I have the confidence that I did in that pick a year ago today, where I said, man, we have our left tackle here. And I do agree some of that's probably to the churning of the veterans on that offensive line, but still I had the expectations. He didn't meet the expectations I had. And so I had to put him there at the least improved. And hopefully it all turns around next year.
I will say Aaron Smith in the chat mentioned Kelvin Benjamin, which is probably a funnier answer.
It is probably a funnier answer. Still, hold on, we got more. So that.
Oh, don't worry, Aaron. Hold tight.
Don't worry, I got you. I'll take the lead on this. Next award is the least valuable player award of the season, and it's I had two guys honestly that I was kind of hemming and hawing over, and it was Charles Clay and Kelvin Benjamin, and it's hands down Kelvin Benjamin is the least, not only the least valuable player of this 2018 Buffalo Bills, but maybe the least valuable player that I can remember in my adult life as a Buffalo Bill. So I don't have to talk a lot about it. I can't stand Kelvin Benjamin. I hit myself every morning when I wake up for even considering re-signing him this summer to any type of deal. I don't know what his problem is. I don't think he can be fixed. I'm so glad that they moved on from him. So Kelvin Benjamin, you are my least valuable player probably in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I'll just for sake of discussion, I'll go with Charles Clay because those were my two as well.
Oh, I lost it there.
Security blink. Sorry about that.
Yeah, go for it.
No, it's okay. I'll go with Charles Clay in the sense that I think that, we needed a veteran safety blanket for our rookie quarterback. We needed that, trusted dump off on 3rd and 4 that we knew the guy was going to be able to get open and be able to make a play for us. And he not only didn't have that in his number one receiver, he didn't have the tight end that he needed to be able to make that happen. So both of those guys had a great opportunity to be a veteran presence as an offensive weapon and to help, coach and develop and bring along a Robert Foster and an Isaiah McKenzie and a Jason Kroom and a Zay Jones. And they just failed in every sense of that term. So I'm glad Kelvin Benjamin's already gone. I'm certain that we are exactly 3 months away from Charles Clay being gone, and the first day of the league year, he will be released and moved on from. So it's something that I think that we're able to move on and erase their impact. I will say Eyeball Billy had a good point with Nathan Peterman, and I think
Devontae Davis is also a good point.
Yeah, Matt Dar. I think some really good comments from the peanut gallery here.
Dar, though, Dar is the kind of guy I got to give a pass to because he's the fourth guy.
Fourth, if you count Corey Carter.
Sure, fourth guy you brought in to be a punter. He was just really patching a hole to get through the year. Not his fault that he's not good at punting. So that one I'll kind of give a pass to. Nathan Peterman, as far as like least improved, I won't go there because he was actually flatlined to how bad he was the first time.
Equally as bad.
It didn't really get worse. It just stayed the same. But yeah, no, I did forget about him in the sense that I'm just happy he's gone, and I don't want to remember him. So
I blocked that out from my life.
Thanks a lot.
I've blacked that out.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back up. I probably won't sleep tonight. So anyway, thanks for that, Eyeball Billy. Let's move on to the one that is probably the most exciting, and I don't know if we'll be on the same page here. I'm really excited to hear where you are at. The most valuable Buffalo Bill of the 2018 season. Give it to me. Who you got?
So most valuable in today's NFL, it's almost impossible not to give that to the quarterback. So I did give Josh Allen the Offensive Rookie of the Year because he deserved an award. And if we're being literal in the definition of it, it's hard not to give it to him. But that's not where I went. And that I think that the most underrated Bill is a guy that doesn't always get the statistical measure of what he provides every game, but that I think people underestimate how consistent the pressure and pass rush that Jerry Hughes provides is. And I think that Jerry Hughes is a big piece of that engine that drives the defense and is able to consistently be in the peripheral of all of our, quarterbacks that we face and is constantly there. And some of the guys that we see with a few more flashes in that we get some cleanup sacks from, blitzes from Raphael Bush and Lorenzo Alexander, and that Tremaine Edmonds gets some, and we saw Trent Murphy clean some stuff up, and all the guys there. I can't tell you how much of that is off of things that the quarterback had to step out of the way because Jerry Hughes was coming to get him, or because the 2 and 3 blockers had to go over to where Jerry Hughes was. And that I think that there's a lot of 1/11th that, McDermott preaches on that defense. I know some guys shouted out Jordan Poyer, and honestly, he was my number 2 choice. That I think Jerry Hughes is incredibly underrated and really is the engine that drives it. And that I hope we add another strong pass rushing threat this offseason to work with them and to rotate in as a younger guy, and to take advantage of the pressure Jerry can still provide and give him a true partner. Hopefully Trent Murphy getting healthy next year. But the Jerry Hughes is my surprise team MVP.
Yeah, it's actually a good choice. When you said it, I kind of am in agreement in a lot of ways. And Jerry's a guy that I've been defending too, man, because people are like, when he dipped out of the double-digit sack world, people are like, oh, Jerry Hughes' production fell off. I'm like, I don't know, man. With everything I watch, the production's there, or the production's not there, but the play is there. And it doesn't always show up on a stat sheet. And the pass rushing is almost just as important as getting sacks. When you talk about influencing the quarterback. And that's really what the league is driven about, is influencing. It's either a quarterback-driven league or how you influence what the quarterback's willing to do or able to do. And Jerry Hughes has impact on that at almost every play. And could you imagine if they called the holding call on that guy once in a while? Oh, I lost you, I think.
Yeah, he never ends up with getting any respect from the refs, and part of that's probably self-induced that he probably brings on himself. But I know at one point he was number 1 in the NFL in overall pressures, hits, and sacks combined. He ended up still top 10 and had a great season overall. So just kind of an underrated player in that a season where the Bills probably didn't have one guy run away with it. Other than, again, you can certainly make an argument for Josh, but I thought it was worthwhile to give that shout out to Jerry.
Yeah, I see a lot of people in the chat going about their opinions, and there's a lot of discussion about Trey White. And for me, it wasn't close. Trey White, I think, is the best player on the Buffalo Bills total roster, and I think that he showed that for a majority of the year. People are talking about when Trey was targeted, that he cracked. Players are going to get, it's a passing league, and players are going to give up plays to good wide receivers. There are a lot of wide receivers out there that are going to make catches on guys even when they're covered. It's going to happen. I don't know that he cracked all that much. I can think of 3 to 4 plays in the entire season that I looked at Trey and was like, oh man, I wish he would have made a better play on that or whatever. But we're talking about the entirety of a season. And when you go through the wide receivers that Trey matched up against and the stretch that he had, kind of in that middle tier of the season of, when he got targeted, sometimes he gave up catches, but people weren't even targeting him. And that is in itself a huge feat that so maybe sometimes he gets targeted and gives up a play, but if he can go a majority of the season without even gaining any types of targets, that in itself tells me that he's an elite player. So I do think he's elite. I think, the season went downhill a little bit for him after, he gave up a couple catches, and I still think that he was a Pro Bowl eligible type player. He kind of slid off of the all pro listings, but I think he has the potential in his career to be an all pro player. And he showed that for a stretch this year. And I think he's the best player on the team. And to me, it's not even close.
5 plays. If you take away the 2 catches from Galladay, the 2 catches from Robbie Anderson, and the touchdown from DeAndre Hopkins, nobody else can even name a play that he gave up all year. And he had that stretch that you were talking about in the middle where he was getting legitimate Deion Sanders treatment, where they just did not test him. Like no one just even went to him for entire games. So yeah, so don't get me wrong. I think that, and he was very honest about it in a couple post-game interviews that, especially the back-to-back, you had that Jets and the Lions game where, Robbie Anderson got him on a couple deep balls. Kenny Galladay, who has 5 inches on him, got him on a couple physical jump balls. Those were 2 rough plays in each game, but it wasn't like he got work the entire game. He gave up 2 plays in each game that were frustrating, and that was it.
And then shut Galladay down for the entire second half of that game.
Yeah, correct. He had a great first half and then got nothing the entire second half. So, I think our standard is so high for Trey that him actually giving up a couple plays ended up being this huge, bottoming out of a season. So it just tells you how high our expectations got for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a guy that probably deserved more of my credit for the MVP would also be Jordan Poyer. But because I think he had such an excellent season. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head talking about Trey. My expectations for Jordan were not met by what he was able to do last season and the impact he had. He still had a lot of impact, but he had a lot of bad moments too. And I think it was more than what Trey had. Just missed assignments, missed tackles, bad angles, things like that, where I saw lapses in his concentration in his game. But he had a lot of impact on the game as well. And another guy that should be talked about in that MVP kind of category. But so that wraps it up for me. Is there anything else about this 2018 season that we didn't really touch on or that you wanted to talk about?
Your favorite player, I did want to give out my Russ Brandon Award. The guy who hangs around much longer than you can possibly conceive why, and that obviously goes to Danny Crossman. So he's made it through the first 3 or 4 days of the offseason here. He's got a couple of us kind of anxious that, hey, we've heard news about Rubisky, we've heard news about Castillo. Again, I'm going logically that's just the order that Bean and McDermott are working their way through the coaching staff and doing their evaluations, but Lord help me if that man holds on for another season. We'll see where things finish up. But, I think it's something that we should be very proud of the season that the Bills had. I think that, people have talked a lot about it's shocking that we might have the most stable organization that didn't make the playoffs. We have the same general manager. We have the same assistant general manager. We have the same head coach, offensive coordinator, defense. All of our key and ready to go forward. And I think it's really exciting as a Bills fan that we might have this thing going the right direction. We might have the right people in place to finally turn this around, and that there's no automatic solution that we're going to solve this offseason. It doesn't mean we're going to find all the right guys. It doesn't mean we're going to draft all the right guys, but we have the opportunity to fix this. Absolutely. We have the assets to bring people in. We have the cap space to bring people in, and we have the chance to fix this. And that's really exciting that we have the same people in place who have shown the ability to draft the right people and sign the right people for their program and their scheme. And now they have a cornucopia of assets to go get the right guys that they've shown the ability to pick out the right players. That's just really exciting and something I don't know that I've felt that way in a long, long time.
I like that you were able to use the word cornucopia, and I couldn't agree more. I like to say the embarrassment of treasures that they have to get this turned around, and I agree with all your views on this team and the things moving forward. Real quick here before we wrap up and tell everybody where to find us and all the good stuff that we wrap this podcast up with. Eyeball Billy, who's had some great pops in the chat. And guys, I don't always respond when I'm doing the show here. I know Greg tries to respond, but we do see everything you guys are talking about here in the chat, and appreciate you coming on and chatting with us and having your own kind of conversations. But he asks us to rate McDermott on a scale, he said out of 10. So a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest coach probably to ever walk the earth, can do no wrong. Where are you at with McDermott at this point?
I don't want to be unreasonable and say 30. So
that's pants off. That's pants off. I love it.
I am a ridiculous McDermott homer. I believe in him unbelievably that he's the right kind of guy that I want leading my organization. So there's a couple things. Obviously, you can knock him for being, tricked into going back to Peterman and mishandling the quarterback situation, but I'll at least give him some credit that he cut the cord and moved on from a guy that he personally had a lot invested in and believed in. I think that speaks well that he's not so regimented that he kept going back to there and literally cut Peterman to move on from there. The same idea, supporting cutting Kelvin Benjamin, being comfortable moving on from some guys that he had brought in, even simple ones like a Vlad Dukas or Phillip Gaines or, guys that he was ready to let the younger guys play and to let them come forward. I think there's a lot to speak to that he's flexible, willing to learn, willing to adapt. So, it's probably a bit rose-colored, but I think 8 out of 10 is not unreasonable. The talent and production and results he's gotten from the last 2 years rosters, I think is as good as just about anybody could do. And that, I don't know that beyond, you're talking about a Bill Belichick or a Sean McVay. I don't know that there's a coach I would trade him for outside of that. So I'm certainly happy that he's leading our organization, and that I think there's certainly things you can question him on, things that didn't go well. But I think a 7 or 8 out of 10 is very reasonable to grade McDermott for this year.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think 7.5, 8. And if there was a few of the mistakes that you mentioned, he would be probably, if he didn't make some of those mistakes, he'd be a little bit higher. But that's going to happen with a guy that's 2 years in to his first stint as a head coach. There's maybe only 4 people in the NFL that I would rather have as a head coach, and I would probably put them as 9s or 10s. So definitely very excited about him. I think fans should be too. When you listen to people that know what they're talking about football, Louis Riddick is a big fan of Sean McDermott. There's a couple other guys that I've heard. Bill Kaiir, a big fan of Sean McDermott, and they see that the coach speak that many fans knock him for is actually something that is coming through with a very not talented roster, and he's able to get the most out of those guys. So that's something that's huge, and very excited about him in the future. Greg, people love your sweater. People love your hair. People love your car seat in the back. So where can they find you to interact with you more and maybe get advice on where you bought that thing?
Yeah, you can come get advice from me on the Bills, on the finest car seats that you can find here, on sweaters, on anything that you're looking for. Come and find me on the Twitter machine. I am there at Greg Thompsett, GregTompsett. Having a good time, putting out information. I was, quoting some hashtag sources earlier today on the random things that I can make up on Twitter and pretend that I said first. So come and find me there.
Oop, I think your neighbor cut off the internet. You there?
Jerk.
Yeah. Man, I hate when they do that. You can find me at Aaron Quinn 716. Always interacting on Twitter, always interacting in the Slack channel. If you want to become a premium member, head over to cover1.net. Take a look at the premium membership. Take a look at all the content that we've got coming out. Make sure you favorite it in your bookmarks or wherever you go. Make sure you if you want, take us with you on the road. You can download the Cover One app on your iOS or Android device through the marketplace. Get on there, download the app. Whenever we do anything, when I put out the podcast tonight and I put it on the site, we send out a push notification to you so you don't miss anything. All the content that's going to be coming out this year leading up to the draft, you're not going to want to miss any of it. It's going to get you ready for what the Bills are going to do. Eric is great at finding guys that he thinks that McDermott and the Bills are going to want. He was all over Milano 2 years ago. He's the only guy I heard talking about Matt Milano, and sure enough that they go out and get him. We got guys. We're sending a regime of people down to the Senior Bowl. You're not going to want to miss that content. So make sure that you have the app, that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Click the notifications on the YouTube channel because the content's going to be pouring out of cover1.net, and it's all for you guys. So thank you for coming out here into the chat all these weeks through a really long 2018 season. I recognize the names all the time in the chat. It's so great that you guys come out and support us every single week when we do this, and look forward to Greg and I being here with you every single week. We're not going to take any time off this off season. We're going to come back at you with the hottest, fieriest content that we can every single week. So make sure that you go over to, like I said, to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe, hit the little notification bell so you know when we go live. And then you guys also follow us on whatever you get your podcast, and send us a little review over there if you like what we do. So thank you guys. And we're on to the 2019 Buffalo Bills season. So look forward to it, and look forward to talking to you guys. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.